The people who save your life are rarely the ones you expect. Rain hammered the streets of Chicago so hard that night it blurred the city into streaks of silver and gold. Headlights reflected across wet pavement. Wind rattled signs above empty sidewalks. I pulled my coat tighter and kept moving. Every instinct told me not to stop. Not tonight. Not when everything had already gone wrong. My name is Claire Harper, and until that evening, I believed I could handle every problem by myself. I had spent months chasing a story that nobody wanted uncovered. Long hours. Endless interviews. Quiet conversations in parking lots and coffee shops. Pieces of a puzzle that seemed harmless at first. Then the pieces started fitting together. That was when the fear began. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself I was being dramatic. Journalists are supposed to be brave, determined, persistent. We are not supposed to admit when something scares us. A cold gust swept across the street as I hurried around the corner. My breathing felt uneven. My thoughts raced faster than my footsteps. I needed somewhere safe, somewhere quiet, somewhere nobody would think to look for me. Across the street, lights glowed from the entrance of a private event venue overlooking the river. Luxury cars lined the curb. Men in dark suits stood beneath the awning, speaking into radios. I recognized the building immediately. Everyone in Chicago knew who owned it. Damian Russo. Powerful. Untouchable. The kind of man whose name traveled through whispers. The kind of man people respected before they ever met him. Normally, I would have walked the other direction. Instead, my legs kept moving toward the entrance. Rain soaked my hair. My hands trembled from exhaustion. The world around me felt strangely distant, as though I were watching someone else's life unfold. The security guards noticed me first. Their expressions shifted from confusion to concern. One stepped forward, then another. Voices blurred together. Questions. Instructions. Movement. I barely heard any of it. The bright lights above the entrance seemed impossibly far away. Then the doors opened. A tall man stepped outside. Calm. Controlled. Effortlessly commanding. Even before anyone said his name, I knew exactly who he was. Damian Russo. The rain seemed quieter around him somehow. He looked at me once, and everything changed. Not because of fear. Not because of power. Because he was paying attention. Really paying attention. His eyes narrowed slightly as if he noticed something everyone else had missed. I tried to speak. Tried to explain why I was there. Tried to tell him that I just needed a moment to think. The words never came. The exhaustion of the past several days crashed into me all at once. My knees weakened. The city tilted sideways. Before I could hit the ground, strong arms caught me. The scent of rain and expensive cologne filled the air. For one strange second, the chaos disappeared. Damian studied me effortlessly. His voice cut through the storm. Low. Sharp. Focused entirely on me. Claire. Hearing my name from a stranger should have frightened me. Instead, it made my heart stop. Because if he knew who I was, then he probably knew why I had come. Thunder rolled above the river. Rain continued falling around us. Damian's gaze locked onto mine. Something dangerous had followed me into that storm. He knew it. I knew it. And judging by the look in his eyes, he had already decided he was not going to let me face it alone. When I opened my eyes again, the storm was gone. At least the one outside. Soft light glowed from a lamp nearby. The scent of cedar and coffee lingered in the air. For a few seconds, I did not recognize where I was. Then memory returned in fragments. Rain. The river. Damian Russo. I sat up too quickly and immediately regretted it. A wave of dizziness forced me back against the cushions. You should not do that. The voice came from across the room. Calm. Controlled. Familiar. Damian stood near a large window overlooking the Chicago skyline. The city lights shimmered against the glass, while distant traffic moved like streams of gold below. He had removed his jacket and rolled his sleeves to his forearms. Somehow that made him seem less intimidating and more dangerous at the same time. I looked around. The room resembled a private penthouse office. Dark wood shelves. Leather furniture. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Everything expensive. Everything quiet. How long was I asleep? I asked. 2 hours. My eyes widened. 2 hours. Damien nodded. You were exhausted. Embarrassment immediately settled over me. I should go. I tried to stand. His expression did not change. You are not leaving. I froze. The words should have sounded controlling. Instead, they sounded protective. Damien. Sit down, Claire. For some reason, I did. Silence settled between us. Outside, rain still traced faint patterns across the windows. Finally, Damien crossed the room and placed a folder on the table in front of me. My stomach tightened immediately. I recognized it. Notes. Documents. Interview records. Months of work. My investigation. Where did you get that? His eyes remained fixed on mine. It was in your bag. I reached for the folder instantly. Relief washed through me when I realized everything was still there. Every page. Every photograph. Every note. Damien watched carefully. You risked a lot for that folder. I looked away. It is my job. A faint shadow crossed his face. No. His voice lowered slightly. It is more than your job. The room suddenly felt smaller. Because he was right. It was more than that. Much more. The story had started as a routine assignment months ago. A simple financial review involving several corporations. Then inconsistencies appeared. Missing funds. Suspicious transactions. Quiet resignations. The deeper I looked, the stranger everything became. Claire. My attention returned to him. Why were you running through a storm carrying that folder? I opened my mouth. Then closed it again. He waited. Patiently. I cannot tell you. His jaw tightened slightly. Not with anger. With concern. Someone frightened you. I shook my head. You do not understand. Then help me understand. The words landed harder than I expected. Because nobody had said them before. Most people asked questions because they wanted information. Damien asked because he wanted the truth. I stared toward the window. Chicago stretched endlessly beneath the night sky. Beautiful. Bright. Complicated. Just like the story I had uncovered. The less you know, the better. For the first time, Damien looked genuinely frustrated. He walked toward the window and stared out across the city. Claire. His voice remained steady. You arrived at my door terrified, exhausted, and alone. He turned toward me. Whatever this is, it is already my concern. My heart skipped unexpectedly. Not because of the words. Because I believed him. Deep down, despite every instinct warning me to stay guarded, I believed him. And that terrified me almost as much as the secret I was still trying to protect. Secrets have a strange way of revealing themselves when you are trying hardest to protect them. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then I saw the Chicago skyline glowing beyond the massive windows and remembered everything. Damien. The storm. The folder. The questions I still refused to answer. I sat quietly on the edge of the guest room bed while pale morning light slowly filled the city. Somewhere below, traffic was beginning to move. People were starting their day. Normal lives. Normal problems. I envied them. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Before I could answer, the door opened slightly. One of Damien's staff members stepped inside carrying breakfast. Coffee. Fresh fruit. Toast. Simple. Thoughtful. Mr. Russo asked me to make sure you ate something, she said with a polite smile. After she left, I stared at the tray. The gesture should not have affected me. Yet it did. Because Damien never treated me like a burden. He treated me like someone worth protecting. An hour later, I found him in his office. He stood near a wall of windows reviewing documents while sunlight reflected across the glass. The city stretched endlessly behind him. Powerful. Beautiful. Untouchable. Very much like the man himself. He looked up as I entered. You slept. I nodded. A little. A faint smile crossed his face. Better than yesterday. I glanced toward the folder resting on his desk. My folder. My investigation. Months of work sitting only a few feet away. Damien followed my gaze. Still worried about that? Yes. His expression softened slightly. Then come look at something. Curiosity pulled me across the room. Damien opened the folder and carefully removed a folded piece of paper. I recognized it immediately. A receipt. Ordinary. Forgettable. Except it was not. My stomach tightened. Where did you find that? Inside one of the side pockets. He placed it on the desk between us. Why would a reporter keep a receipt from 6 months ago? I stared at the paper. Of all the documents in the folder, this was the last one I expected him to notice. Damien folded his arms. Because it matters. Not a question. A statement. The realization unsettled me. Most people saw paperwork. Damien saw patterns. I lowered my eyes. The receipt connected several pieces of my investigation. Dates. Meetings. Financial records. Tiny details that meant nothing separately but everything together. Claire. His voice remained calm. You are not chasing a story anymore. I looked up slowly. He met my gaze without hesitation. You are chasing the truth about someone powerful. Silence filled the room. Outside, sunlight continued climbing across the skyline. Inside, my heartbeat seemed impossibly loud. Because he was right. Months ago, this had been a story. Now it had become something else entirely. Something bigger. Something capable of changing lives. Damien watched me carefully. And whatever you found is the reason you came to me. The frightening part was not that he understood. The frightening part was how quickly he understood. I swallowed hard. You should stay out of it. For the first time that morning, he laughed softly. Not amused. Certain. Claire. He closed the folder and slid it toward me. I think that became impossible the moment you arrived at my door. And judging by the look in his eyes, he had already decided he was going to uncover the truth right beside me. The truth becomes heavier the moment you realize you are no longer carrying it alone. For the rest of that day, Damien stayed unusually quiet. Not distant. Not cold. Thoughtful. I could almost see him fitting pieces together behind those calm eyes. By evening, Chicago glowed beneath a blanket of amber lights and drifting clouds. The storm had passed, but another kind of tension remained. I stood beside the window of the penthouse office, watching traffic flow along the river below. Somewhere out there were answers I had spent months searching for. Somewhere out there were people who wanted those answers buried. The thought made my stomach tighten. You are doing it again. Damien's voice came from behind me. I turned. He was sitting at the conference table with several documents spread before him. Doing what? I asked. A faint smile touched his lips. Trying to solve everything by yourself. I looked away. The frustrating part was that he was right. Again. Damien motioned toward the chair across from him. Reluctantly, I sat down. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Then he slid a newspaper article across the table. I recognized it instantly. One of my earliest reports. A routine financial story published nearly a year ago. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Damien tapped the article lightly. Because this is where it started. My eyes narrowed. How do you know that? He leaned back slightly. Because I spent the afternoon reading everything you have written during the last 12 months. The realization surprised me. Nobody had ever taken my work that seriously before. Damien continued. At first you were investigating ordinary financial irregularities. He pointed toward another document. Then you started noticing connections. Another page. Another note. Another piece of evidence. After that, you began asking questions nobody else was asking. Silence settled over the room. Damien's voice lowered. Claire, you were never chasing a single company. My heartbeat quickened. Then what was I chasing? He met my gaze directly. A network. The words seemed to echo between us. A network. Not one corporation. Not one executive. Something larger. Something hidden beneath layers of paperwork and legitimate business transactions. For months I had sensed it without fully understanding it. Hearing someone else say it aloud made it real. Damien folded his hands. You found a pattern. I swallowed hard. I think so. No. His expression remained steady. You did. For the first time, I allowed myself to admit the truth. I had uncovered something important. Important enough to frighten me. Important enough to send me running through a storm with a folder clutched against my chest. important enough to bring me to Damien Rousseau's door. Outside, city lights reflected across the river like scattered stars. Inside, a strange sense of relief began replacing fear. Because the secret was no longer mine alone. Damien studied me carefully before speaking again. Whatever happens next, you are not facing it by yourself. The words should have sounded dramatic. Instead, they sounded simple, honest, certain. And sitting across from the one man I had spent years hearing rumors about, I realized something unexpected. For the first time since this investigation began, I felt safe enough to believe him. Trust is not built when someone promises to protect you. It is built when they prove it over and over again without asking for anything in return. The days that followed felt strangely different. For the first time in months, I was not constantly looking over my shoulder. Not because the investigation had become less dangerous. If anything, the deeper Damien and I looked, the more complicated everything appeared. The difference was that I was no longer carrying the weight alone. One cold evening, I sat in a private library inside Damien's penthouse reviewing documents spread across a large wooden table. Financial reports, public records, corporate filings. Hundreds of pages that seemed unrelated until you looked closely enough. Outside, snow drifted across the Chicago skyline. Inside, the fireplace filled the room with warm light. Damien stood near the shelves, reading through another stack of files. Neither of us had spoken for nearly 20 minutes. Somehow the silence felt comfortable, familiar, safe. Finally, Damien set down a document and looked toward me. "You missed dinner." I blinked. "What?" His expression remained calm. "You have been staring at spreadsheets for 4 hours." I glanced at the clock and immediately frowned. He was right. Again. I was busy. A faint smile appeared. "That sounds familiar." I rolled my eyes. "You are impossible." "So I have been told." Before I could argue, one of his staff members entered carrying 2 plates. I stared in confusion. Damien did not even look surprised. "You ordered food?" I asked. "Hours ago." He sat across from me. I knew you would forget. The frustrating part was that he knew me well enough now to be correct. As we ate, conversation slowly replaced paperwork. For the first time since arriving at Damien's door, I found myself talking about things unrelated to the investigation. Childhood memories. Journalism school. My first terrible apartment with broken heating. Damien listened more than he spoke. Yet every question he asked revealed genuine interest. Not curiosity. Interest. There was a difference. At one point, I laughed while telling a story about accidentally locking myself out of my apartment during a snowstorm years ago. Damien actually smiled. The sight nearly distracted me from my own story. "What?" he asked. "Nothing." I shook my head. "I just realized something." His eyebrow lifted slightly. "That should concern me. People talk about you like you are intimidating all the time." "And?" I smiled. "You are surprisingly normal." Damien laughed quietly. The sound filled the room. Genuine. Unforced. That might be the strangest compliment I have ever received. Hours later, after dinner ended and the files returned to the table, I noticed something sitting beside my notebook. A new phone. I looked toward Damien immediately. "What is this?" "A secure phone." "Damien." He remained calm. "If this investigation is as significant as we believe, then communication matters." I stared at the device. "You did not have to do that." His gaze met mine. "Steady. Certain." "I know." The answer stayed with me long after the conversation ended. Because he never helped out of obligation. He helped because he cared. As the fire crackled softly nearby and snow continued falling beyond the windows, I realized something that should have frightened me. Every day I spent with Damien Rousseau made it harder to imagine facing the future without him standing beside me. The strongest people are often the ones carrying wounds nobody can see. A week passed before I finally told Damien the truth about why I could never walk away from the investigation. Not the documents. Not the corporations. Not the network hidden beneath layers of financial records. The personal truth. The one I avoided even when I was alone. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Snow covered the city in a blanket of white. The river moved slowly beneath a pale winter sky. Damien and I sat in a private lounge overlooking downtown Chicago. A fire burned softly nearby. For once, there were no spreadsheets between us. No reports. No evidence. Just silence. Comfortable silence. The kind that only exists when trust has already begun to grow. I stared out the window for several minutes before speaking. My father lost everything when I was 16. The words surprised even me. Damien remained still. Listening. Not interrupting. Not rushing me. Just listening. A company closed unexpectedly. Retirement savings disappeared. Medical bills followed. I swallowed hard. After that, everything changed. Memories returned with painful clarity. Long nights. Extra jobs. Missed opportunities. Watching my parents struggle while pretending everything would be fine. Learning far too young that life could change without warning. I started working as soon as I could, I continued. I promised myself I would never let people take advantage of families like mine again. Damien's expression softened. That is why you became a journalist. I nodded. At first, I thought reporting was about facts. A faint smile touched my lips. Then I realized it was really about people. Outside, snowflakes drifted slowly across the skyline. Inside, the fire crackled quietly. Every number in those reports belongs to someone, I said. Someone trying to pay rent. Someone supporting a family. Someone trusting the system, to be honest. My voice grew quieter. When I found evidence that people were being hurt, I could not ignore it. Damien looked down briefly before meeting my eyes again. Even when it frightened you? Yes. The answer came immediately. He nodded slowly, as though something finally made sense. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Damien surprised me. I understand that. I frowned slightly. You do. He stood and walked toward the window. The city reflected in the glass behind him. Powerful. Distant. Yet suddenly he looked neither. He looked human. My mother spent years trusting people who made promises they never intended to keep. His voice remained calm, but I could hear something deeper beneath it. Old pain. Old disappointment. I learned early that power means very little if it is never used to protect anyone. The admission hung quietly between us. It was the most personal thing he had shared since the night we met. Slowly, I stood and joined him by the window. Snow continued falling beyond the glass. Two people standing side by side. Two different lives shaped by similar lessons. So that is why you helped me, I said softly. Damien looked at me. Partly. My heartbeat quickened unexpectedly. What is the other reason? For a moment, he simply held my gaze. Then a faint smile appeared. Because somewhere along the way, Claire Harper, you stopped being a responsibility. My breath caught. The city lights began to glow as evening settled over Chicago. And standing beside Damien, I realized the wall I had spent years building around my heart was beginning to disappear. Sometimes the people we fear most are the ones carrying the heaviest regrets. A few days after our conversation by the window, the city began thawing from winter. Snow still lingered along the sidewalks, but warmer air drifted through Chicago. The investigation continued moving forward. New records. New connections. New questions. Yet something else had changed as well. For the first time since I met Damien, I stopped seeing the reputation that followed him everywhere. I started seeing the man behind it. The realization happened unexpectedly. One afternoon, I arrived at a community center on the south side of the city to conduct interviews for an unrelated article. The building needed repairs. The gymnasium roof leaked. The after-school program struggled for funding. Nothing unusual. I had reported on similar stories for years. What surprised me was seeing Damien there. He stood near the entrance, speaking with the director. No cameras. No reporters. No publicity. Just a quiet conversation. I stayed back, observing. Over the next hour, I watched him meet with staff members, listen to parents, and talk with children who greeted him by name. By name. Not title. Not reputation. Name. When the meeting ended, I finally approached him. I did not expect to see you here. Damien glanced toward the basketball court where several children were laughing. Why not? Because nobody knows you do this. A faint smile appeared. That is usually the point. We walked through the hallway together. Afternoon sunlight streamed through old windows, casting long shadows across the floor. How long have you been helping this place? I asked. 8 years. I stopped walking. 8 years. Damien nodded. There are several others. The answer stunned me. Not because of the money involved. Because he had never mentioned any of it. Most powerful people wanted recognition. Damien seemed determined to avoid it. As we continued walking, I found myself studying him differently. Every story I had heard, every rumor, every assumption, none of them matched the man beside me. You care more than people realize, I said quietly. Damien looked ahead. Most people only see what they expect to see. The words stayed with me. Because I had done exactly that. I had expected power, control, distance. Instead, I found kindness hidden behind discipline. Compassion hidden behind strength. Later that evening, we returned to the penthouse. The skyline glowed beyond the windows as sunset painted the city gold. Damien poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to me. You have been quiet. I smiled slightly. I am rethinking a few things. His eyebrow lifted. That sounds dangerous. I laughed softly. Maybe. Silence settled comfortably between us. Then I looked at him. Really looked at him. Not the reputation. Not the headlines. Not the stories people told. Just Damien. Thank you, I said. He seemed genuinely surprised. For what? My eyes drifted toward the city lights. For proving that people are more than the worst thing others say about them. For a moment, he said nothing. Then his voice softened. Claire, that works both ways. My heartbeat stumbled unexpectedly. Because in that moment, I realized neither of us had saved the other from danger. We were saving each other from loneliness. And, somehow, that felt even more important. The truth does not always arrive like a storm. Sometimes it arrives quietly, hidden inside a detail everyone else overlooked. 3 days after our visit to the community center, I found it. Damien and I had spent hours reviewing documents in the library. Financial statements covered the table. Notes filled entire notebooks. Outside, spring was beginning to replace winter. Sunlight reflected across the river. The city felt lighter. But inside that room, everything changed with a single piece of paper. I was comparing transaction dates when one name caught my attention. At first it seemed insignificant. A consulting firm mentioned only twice across hundreds of pages. Yet something about it felt familiar. I searched through older records. Then older notes. Then archived interviews. My pulse quickened. Damien. He looked up immediately. What is it? I handed him the documents. His eyes moved quickly across the pages. The room grew silent. You found a connection, he said. Not a question. A fact. I nodded slowly. The consulting firm appeared linked to nearly every company involved in the network we had been investigating. Hidden. Quiet. Almost invisible. Yet always present. For months I had been searching for the center of the puzzle. Suddenly, it was staring back at me. Damien studied the information carefully. His expression remained calm, but I could see the intensity behind his eyes. This changes everything. The realization sent a chill through me. Not because I was afraid. Because for the first time, the truth finally had a shape. We spent the rest of the afternoon verifying every detail. Dates matched. Records matched. Interviews matched. Piece after piece fell into place. By sunset, neither of us could deny what we were seeing. The network was real. More importantly, it could be exposed. As evening settled across Chicago, I stepped onto the penthouse terrace for air. The skyline stretched endlessly beneath a sky painted gold and blue. Wind brushed against my face. For months, I had chased answers. Now that they were within reach, I felt strangely emotional. The terrace door opened behind me. Damien joined me without speaking. We stood side by side overlooking the city. You did it, he said quietly. I shook my head. We did it. A faint smile appeared. Fair enough. For several moments, neither of us spoke. The city lights gradually flickered to life below. Then Damien broke the silence. Do you remember the night you arrived here? I laughed softly. How could I forget? His gaze remained fixed on the skyline. You looked like someone carrying the weight of the world. I looked down briefly. Maybe I was. Damien turned toward me. You are not carrying it alone anymore. The words settled deep inside me. Because they were true. Somewhere between the storm and this moment, everything had changed. The investigation mattered. The truth mattered. But standing there beside Damien, I realized the greatest discovery had nothing to do with documents or hidden networks. It was trust. Trust built one conversation at a time. One act of kindness at a time. One difficult truth at a time. As the city lights shimmered beneath the evening sky, I looked at Damien and understood something neither of us had expected when this journey began. The truth had brought us together. But it was not the reason we stayed. Some endings do not feel like endings at all. They feel like the first quiet step toward the life you were meant to have. 2 months later, Chicago stood beneath bright spring skies. The investigation that had consumed so much of my life was finally complete. The evidence had been verified. The reports had been published. The truth was no longer hidden inside folders and late-night conversations. It belonged to the public now. The strange thing was that after spending so long chasing answers, I did not feel triumphant. I felt peaceful. One Saturday morning, I walked along the river with a coffee in my hand and sunlight warming my face. Families filled the sidewalks. Boats moved slowly across the water. The city seemed lighter somehow. Or maybe I was the one who had changed. My phone vibrated. A message from Damien. One sentence. Meet me on the terrace. I smiled immediately. Some habits never changed. 30 minutes later, I stepped onto the rooftop terrace of the building where everything had begun. The same skyline stretched before me. The same river reflected the afternoon light. Yet nothing felt the same. Damien stood near the railing, his hands in his pockets as he looked across the city. When he turned toward me, I realized he seemed different too. Lighter. Less guarded. You were late, he said. I laughed. 3 minutes. A familiar smile appeared. I noticed. The memory instantly brought us back to our first meeting. A frightened reporter. A storm. A night neither of us could have predicted. For a few moments, we stood together in comfortable silence. Then Damien handed me a small folder. I opened it curiously. Inside were plans for a new community journalism foundation. Scholarships. Training programs. Grants for young reporters. Resources for local investigations. My eyes widened. Damien. He watched me carefully. You once told me every number belongs to a person. Emotion tightened in my throat. I remember. This foundation will help people tell stories that matter. I looked back at the documents. Then at him. You did this. He shook his head. We did. The words hit harder than he probably realized. Because throughout my life, almost every challenge had been mine alone. My responsibility. My burden. Yet somewhere along the way, that changed. Damien never tried to take control of my life. He simply stood beside me until I no longer felt alone. Wind drifted across the terrace. Below us, the city moved with its usual rhythm. People heading to work. Families spending time together. Ordinary lives continuing forward. I slipped the folder closed and smiled. You know, when I first met you, I was terrified. Damien laughed quietly. I am aware. And now, he asked. I looked at him. Really looked at him. The man who had noticed my fear before I admitted it. The man who had protected my courage when I nearly lost it. The man who had become home without either of us realizing it. Now I cannot imagine my future without you in it. For the first time, Damien seemed completely speechless. Then he smiled. Not the controlled smile the world usually saw. Something warmer. Something real. As the sun began to set over Chicago, painting the skyline gold, I realized the most important truth I had uncovered was never hidden in financial records or secret networks. It was much simpler than that. Sometimes the person who catches you when you are falling becomes the reason you finally learn how to live again.